What sets advice-only financial planners apart? Which questions should we be asking in order to retire in 10 years? What are the most common financial mistakes made by individuals following divorce? Welcome to the Investing Teacher Podcast. I'm your host, Tim Cavey, and my mission here is to help middle-income earners learn how to invest wisely and build financial freedom, even in uncertain times. We're here to share our thoughts and opinions. For financial advice, please seek the services of a professional financial advisor. Today's investor is Steve Bridge. Steve is an experienced advice-only financial planner committed to boosting financial literacy. With close to a decade in the personal finance sphere, Steve's passion lies in helping his clients to make optimal financial choices, all without the sale of products. Beyond financial talk, Steve enjoys outdoor activities like running, biking, and hockey. You can connect with Steve on LinkedIn, on X at Steve Money Coach, and on his website at moneycoachescanada.ca. Steve, thanks so much for coming on the show today. Are you, sir, ready to talk investing?
I sure am. Thanks for having me, Tim. Looking forward to it.
Steve, let's start with story time. What first convinced you to adopt an investing mindset and become more intentional in your own investing practices?
Back in the mid-90s or so, I was entering the workforce, starting to save a little bit of money, and my father encouraged me to invest into an RRSP, Registered Retirement Savings Plan. At that time, there were limited choices with how you did that. So I did it through the bank, and I bought mutual funds, which was the most common type of investment at that time. It seemed like I was started, it all seemed fine. And then I saved some more money. By the early 2000s, I had saved a little bit more money from working overseas. And I asked my mom, what should I do with this? She said, go see my financial advisor. He's great. And I've heard that many, many times in the 20 plus years since then. So I went to see this fellow, and he showed me lots of fancy charts and graphs and colors. And I thought, this looks amazing. Yes, here's my money. Thank you, sir. And 5 years later, it was worth less than when I started.
Oh, no.
Yes. And I didn't know much about investing, but I knew I should probably have more than when I started. So that encouraged me to start reading, educating myself, and picked up some books. One of those was on dividend reinvestment plans, DRIPs. And I threw myself into that, into the investing in stocks that had DRIP programs and optional cash purchase programs. And I did that for many years. I would write checks in, and the dividends would just be reinvested. I never received any dividends. They were just reinvested, and then they just kept rolling for many, many years. Excuse me. And I got off that track about 7 or 8, 9, maybe a little bit more, 8, 9 years ago. But I've left the DRIPs as they are, and they continue to reinvest themselves, and they're just doing their thing.
Thank you so much, Steve. Wow. That says a lot, and I think it matches a lot of people's experience of putting, at least traditionally, putting all of our money, as you said, rather blindly with some sort of expert, and then being disappointed by the results. So we're going to get a little deeper into all of that, but I think self-education, it sounds like you would agree, is the way forward for investors who want to get started. Take us into your work as an advice-only financial planner, Steve, with Money Coaches Canada. What services do you offer there, and why should people consider the advice-only route? What sets that apart?
So advice-only planners are a real minority in this country. There's about 100,000 financial advisors. Everyone knows a financial advisor. Of those, about 150 are advice-only planners. And what that means is we don't sell any products, we don't receive commissions, we don't have referral fees or sales quotas or anything like that. People come to us because they want straight answers on, okay, tell me what to do with no potential conflict of interest. It's all straight, unbiased advice. We act as fiduciaries, i.e. in our clients, pledge to work in our clients' best interest, and tell them just what they need to do to achieve whatever it is they want to. The catch with the commission-based model is it opens up to a potential, not necessarily there is one, but a potential conflict of interest in that, am I getting into the lowest fee product, or am I getting into something that might make someone a little bit more money. And more importantly, probably, is that commission-based advisors don't have the time to go into the weeds, to get granular about all the other things that are really, really important. In fact, I would say more important than the investment piece. Goals, values, cash flow, real estate, pensions, taxes, insurance, estate planning, kids. Did I say pensions? All of those other things. So an advice-only planner has the time to go and actually do those things.
I really, really like this model. I'm new to it, and I didn't realize that this particular niche existed, Steve, but I'm excited by the idea because of exactly what you said. You've got no skin in the game, no potential conflict of interest. And that's going to mean I can trust your advice a whole lot more, I think. And I think of so many other areas or corners of the financial industry where someone is bringing an ulterior motive to the conversation. Let's talk about retirement, Steve. This is one of your areas of expertise. What are some of the key areas to look at and questions that I need to ask in order to retire comfortably in 10 years?
So where I start with my clients is figuring out, okay, what's your life going to look like in 10 years? Where are you going to be living? What are you going to be doing? Those kind of things. So figuring out, are you going to downsize your home? Do you want to go traveling? Are you going to be gardening? So looking at all of this leads to, what's that going to cost? What is going to be our average annual target spending in retirement? That is the most important number when it comes to retirement planning. Next comes, okay, what are income sources and is there a gap? So with a lot of teachers who might be watching this, will have a defined benefit pension plan. What's that going to pay you per month? There'll be Canada Pension Plan, Old Age Security. There might be RSPs, tax-free savings accounts, non-registered investments. There might be real estate or other income sources, even part-time work possibly for some people. And so marrying those two numbers, that's our target spending. This is what we think we're going to have. Do they match up, or is there a gap? Or maybe we have to save a little bit more for the next 10 years. Or maybe we're already there and we can save less and spend more now, or retire a little bit earlier, or spend more in retirement. It's there's a lot of permutations and combinations when it comes to that.
So what I hear you saying is it really starts with getting practical and specific about what our retirement costs will amount to, and then working sort of reverse engineering from there. I like that.
Yeah, if you don't know that number, I'm not sure really how you plan for retirement. And I guess for most people, they just okay, this is what we got, this is what we'll spend, kind of thing, as opposed to a purposeful planning exercise as to, this is what we would like to achieve, this is the life that we would like to have. Are we going to get there?
Right.
And 10 years is a good runway, actually, Tim.
Oh, I saw that on your feed on X, so I'm interested. I think we'll have to continue this conversation sometime off air. Something else, Steve, that you specialize in that you're not afraid of is this whole area of separation and divorce. And this is a challenging life occurrence for a lot of people. I've been through it. I have some regrets here. So what are, in your view, what are the most common financial mistakes that individuals tend to make following divorce, or maybe in the course of divorce, and how can we avoid them?
I think one of the most beneficial things people can do is figure out their new reality. The money, I'm talking about the money side of things, the emotional behavioral stuff, that's all completely separate. But from the work that I do, what is your new reality? Odds are the expenses are going to look a lot different than they did when you were single. And this is a bit of a side note here. This is why I'm such a big fan of cash flow. Cash flow does not get the airtime it deserves, but in my opinion, it is the number one important thing when it comes to personal success, whether it's divorce or not divorce. But in the divorce example, for example, what is my new life going to look like? What are my expenses going to be? Odds are that housing costs are going to look different. You, the individual, are now responsible for everything, as opposed to before where there were two income sources and people were splitting things, and it looked different than it does now. So figure that out. Also figure out income sources. Of course, you're now on one income. There may or may not be child support or spousal support. So I would say figuring out in your reality, and you might have to have hard conversations with yourself about, okay, I knew we had this lifestyle as a couple with one paid off house, for example, and but now it's all on me. And you still need to be able to plan for your own retirement, support your kids, get the car repaired, maybe do some travel, whatever other parts of your life there are. Getting real about what those look like, how much they're going to cost, and maybe it doesn't look quite like it did before, but there was a reason you chose to go down this path, and now you have to have real conversations about the reality of your new situation.
Thank you for joining us, investors. If you're finding value here, give this video a like. Steve, what is one piece of advice that you share with people contemplating home ownership? You just talked about housing costs. I'm wondering, do you have a rule of thumb in terms of what is an acceptable proportion of monthly income to allocate to housing costs? And I'll preface this or put an asterisk here to say you and I live on the West Coast, where an alarmingly expensive housing market. I've gone through the experience of intentionally choosing a house poor kind of route to buy a detached home, and then it went quite well for me. So I'm curious to hear how you will respond to this one.
Yeah, so on paper, Tim, the answer is 30%.
Right.
30% of income to all of your housing costs. And historically, that's a really good number. And still on paper, it's a really good number. For us, as you mentioned, on the West Coast and probably in Toronto and other major cities, it's more aspirational now. But that again comes with hard conversations around, okay, I really want to own this house. What am I willing to do to own it? And to address your question directly about one piece of advice, I'm going to say, get real about what your cash flow is going to look like after you've purchased this house. Not just the mortgage, but property taxes, property insurance, condo or strata fees, depending if you live in a condominium property or strata property, repairs, maintenance, renovations, landscaping, home decor, furniture, appliances, etc., etc., etc. Get real about these things. I put in a budget a line item for 1% of the home's value for home repairs and maintenance per year on average. Doesn't mean you're going to spend that every year, but every 4 or 5 years, that's a pretty good average of what you'll probably spend on maintaining or repairing or renovating this home. So don't go in with, my advice is don't go in blindly to home ownership. I mean, I worked with some people who were gifted some money to put a down payment on a home. They also then had a big wedding and bought a new car and did some renovations. And they came to me because they were going backwards quite a bit. They couldn't actually afford the house. And they'd asked the father for another loan. And the father said, wait a minute, I've already loaned you money. What happened to that? So the reality for them was they couldn't carry the home. The numbers just weren't working. So the father wanted me to make a plan for them to see if they could make it work and stay in the home and hopefully pay back him at some point.
Those cases must get really tricky and dicey for you, Steve, when you're trying to mediate between clients and the bank of mom and dad. But those interfamily loans, I think I engaged in a bit of that years and years ago, but that's always a little bit sensitive, isn't it?
Sorry, Tim, not to interrupt, but just one thing I like to say when it comes to housing is that people can still be financially successful, secure, confident, etc., by choosing to rent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And anyway, sorry, I just wanted to get that out there because it's something that I hear quite often and that I feel strongly about, because renting gets a bad rap in the press and at Thanksgiving dinner tables.
It does. There's a lot of stability in rent in a lot of ways, and you're never facing, let's say, a roof repair or some of these larger expenses that come along with home ownership. I will say, and I know you're aware of this, that it's such an interesting landscape when renting, let's say, a 3-bedroom home amounts to something very similar to what you might be paying for a mortgage payment. So the approximation of those two costs is just makes for an interesting time. Let's talk about.
That's a good. Sorry to interrupt him, but that's a very good point. But you also need to add in not just the mortgage payment. Like when you're owning a home, it's not just rent versus mortgage. It's all those other things that I mentioned before that people should account for. So anyway, just something to just.
Absolutely, yes. So we'll say renting typically will still come out in the lead in terms of savings on that net monthly payment, thinking about cash flow and stability in that sense.
I was just going to say, Tim, sorry, that there's to all of these financial situations, there's the math answer, but there's also the behavioral, psychological life answer.
Right.
And there's a lot to be said for having the pride of home ownership, which you can't put on a spreadsheet or a balance sheet, right? I still encourage people to go into home ownership with their eyes wide open and understanding what the financial commitment's going to be. And they might look at the numbers and go, these don't work, but home ownership is so important for us, we're willing to get a second job or cut back on travel or not eat out at all ever again, or whatever it might be. So.
Yeah, great point. As sometimes, as Dave Ramsey says, the only restaurants you should see are the ones that you're working inside of. In certain situations, I guess, if, as you say, home ownership means that much to you. Yeah. Well, I'd love to go on a tangent in terms of real estate, but let's keep going with the broader topic of investing. I'm curious, Steve, and I'm so excited to ask someone who, again, has no vested interest in a particular asset or investment class here. But when it comes to stocks, bonds, real estate, venture capital, and here I'm thinking of investing in small startup companies and that sort of thing, cryptocurrency, which is your favorite investing class and why?
So, Tim, this may be the most boring answer you ever get on this show.
A safe answer.
But my answer, and this is my personal answer, is index funds.
Yeah.
Globally diversified, plain vanilla, broad index funds. That's all I've been buying the last 8-9 years or so. And that's, as I say, probably the most boring answer you'll ever get on this show. But that's what I do, and that's that's a short answer.
Totally fair, Steve. And I see that again and again in the financial conversations that go on X or LinkedIn, that you just can't, at the end of the day, it's slow and steady, but you just cannot beat the index funds and ETFs that are out there. So fair enough. Speak to that veteran teacher or middle income earner, Steve, who doesn't see themselves as an active investor. Is it ever too late, in your opinion, to get into the investing game?
Short answer, no. And if I may, I don't use the word game or play when it comes to investing. I hear it all the time, Tim. Excuse me. I hear it all the time, like, oh, get in the game and what's your latest play? And I'm like, no, this is your life. Don't be gaming. Don't be playing. But I completely know where you're coming from here. Too late to get into investing? Absolutely not, Tim. I'm glad you asked that. It's never too late. Like, what questions need to be answered before you do that, though? Why are you investing? Like, what's the purpose of this? When do you need the money? If it's for 3-4 years in the future, then maybe that should be in high interest savings accounts or GICs. Again, boring, but you can't take the risk of a major correction, making all of your house down payment or wedding or whatever money disappear. So anything 5 years out, then get into a globally diversified portfolio and go for it. But no, absolutely never too late.
All right, I'm getting a sense of your investing philosophy, so I think I know how you might respond on this one. But cryptocurrency, Steve, they've had quite a ride for the last 5 to 10 years. I've never invested, but I sort of watch from the sidelines. I know there's a lot of Bitcoin bulls out there. Where do you think crypto is headed?
Well, Tim, I can confidently say that I have no idea. I have no idea, but I do find the whole thing fascinating. About 10 years ago, I was co-running an investment club, and one of our members did an excellent presentation on the blockchain and Bitcoin. And he didn't have an agenda. He wasn't selling anything. He's just one of our members, but it was a really, really good presentation. And I, I thought, wow, this is really cool. I didn't buy any. And it was probably trading for about $200 at that point, $200 per Bitcoin. Yeah, somewhere around there. And I sometimes think, oh boy, what if I had bought some? What if I just put $1,000 in and I bought 5 coins for $1,000? Great. And then a few months later, whenever my money doubled and it was now worth $2,000, I think I would have been pretty excited. I think I would have sold because I've just doubled my money. Doubling your money is a very good investment. So anyone who has the temperament to hold an investment like that for the long term, my hat is off to them. It really, really is, because I always think, and it doesn't matter if it's Apple stock or Bitcoin or Nvidia or Amazon, whatever, it doesn't matter. I often think, like, how do you know when to get out? If you're buying something like that, how do you know when to get out? And my thought is, like, times, and you're old enough to know, like Nortel, Enron, BlackBerry. At the time, these all seemed infallible. It seemed like, wow, these are solid, solid bets. I should be buying these. These are great. But then, for various reasons, each of them had large downfalls. And I don't know what company is set up for the next big downfall. And I'm not saying about any specific stock whatsoever here, but that's just my take.
All right. Well, that's a polite take. I'm waiting for the guest Steve to really just dump on Bitcoin and crypto in general. To me it seems so speculative and really attached to next to nothing in terms of real value. But at any rate, as you said, it is fascinating to watch where it might go. Let's circle back to stocks for a moment. You talked about investing in the S&P or index funds. Do you have a particular, now you might be reluctant to get more specific, Steve. I understand the anxiety around financial advice, but as I said off the top, we are sharing opinions. So whatever you feel comfortable with.
Sure.
Is it a Vanguard ETFs, or do you have a particular favorite in this space?
Without naming specifics, like, it's
Sure.
interesting. As an advice-only financial planner, I'm not allowed to give specific buy-sell advice. I'm not
Okay.
securities licensed, actually. I come up with investment strategies for my clients. We talk about asset allocation. We talk about fees. We talk about implementation. We talk about the behavioral aspects of investing, but I never talk about specific buy or sell. But again, for me personally, my time horizon, I mean, I'm 52 now. This money could be invested for 10, 20, 30, even 40 years. So my asset allocation's very close to like 85% equities and 10, 15% bonds kind of thing. So that's my personal asset allocation. But the answer, again, is pretty boring. All just globally diversified ETFs. And as you probably know, there's all-in-one funds you can buy that have different asset allocations depending on your time horizon and risk tolerance, all the way from 100% bonds to 100% equities, and you have instant global diversification. That's just an example of a product, not a recommendation.
Sure. Okay. Thanks for tuning in to the audio only version of the show. Podcast listeners, consider adding the Investing Teacher podcast to your commute. Steve, what's been the most positive investment move that you've ever made? Do you look back at a particular decision to say, this put me on a better track?
Well, as I said before, there's financial answers and there's behavioral, psychological, life answers to all of these things when it comes to our money. And about 5-6 years ago, I sold my very small investment properties. And at the time, it was the best answer, because when I did all the math, like, okay, you get the rent, but then you have to do the proper math on how much these things are actually costing you. And then that money, as you probably know, is taxable as income. So after tax, what is my return? And the numbers just didn't make sense for me. Plus, the hassle factor of managing properties is a real thing. So I said, you know what? I'm done. I sold them and I just bought index funds with the money. So that for me was a really great move because it didn't take up any effort, time, hassle, whatever. It was just easy. It was just in the bank, being invested, and that was it. Now, since then, in the last couple of years with COVID and whatnot, the value of those properties would have increased quite a bit. But I still stand by my decision that for me at the time it was the best one.
I like how you continually bring emotional quality of life into the conversation, Steve. I think that's so important. It's not and you also said it's not a game. So I almost said it's not a math game, but it's not all about the numbers, right? It's all about choosing the quality of life that you want to build for yourself. Looking back on your investing journey, Steve, what's one piece of advice that you wish you could share with your 25-year-old self?
Well, if I was 20, if either one of us were 25 now, we have that great option of tax-free savings accounts,
Yes.
which, in my opinion, was misnamed, Tim. It should have been called a tax-free investment account. It should have been named a tax-free investment account because that's the best use of these accounts. Putting savings in this tax-free savings account, not the best use of it because you're really not saving yourself much tax at all. The real benefit is investing for the long term in these accounts and letting it ride for the next 20, 25 years. So if someone was 25 year old, if I was 25 years old today and I knew what I know now, I would put as much money as I could into TFSA, into longer term investments with high growth potential, and just keep adding to it, maxing it out every year. And that 25-year-old at 50 or 55 would be very, very happy.
Yes, you would. What's one thought that you would share, Steve, with middle-aged earners who are typically earning a reasonable salary? And you spoke to this earlier. Maybe we were off air, I can't recall. But let's say they are sitting on top of a pretty generous pension plan. Do they need to think about investing? Or I guess this answer is going to be it's really case specific.
Yeah, the first answer to every personal finance question, Tim, is it depends.
Sure.
It depends. Yeah. So there is a chance that person with a generous defined benefit pension plan may not need to invest at all because they may receive what they require for their retirement from their pension. Now, of course, it depends on how long they've been working there, what their income has been. And I go back to that lifestyle spending. What's your target lifestyle spending? Maybe the pension takes care of all that, and you don't need to do any investing whatsoever. I will say that people with defined benefit pension plans can treat that more as the fixed income part of their portfolio, in that they could take not a little bit more risk, but be comfortable with a little bit more volatility, i.e. more equity, stocks, shares, than maybe some other people.
Right. I suppose part of your answer there on the pension plans is it sounds like you have a relative amount of faith in, not a blind faith, but a relative amount of faith in the lasting power of the larger pension plans. So that's one thing that some critics will say, oh, you can't count on any of them. But I think in general, when we're talking about public service, they should be pretty safe, right? And then the other factor that I think about too, Steve, is just inflation. And the prospect of inflation eating away at our incomes. But I don't hear, okay, yeah.
Two very good points you made there, Tim. One is if you're not with a provincial or federal pension plan, you may want to check how well funded your pension is. Like defined benefit pension is great unless the money isn't actually there to pay you. And I really, really feel sorry for people at Sears who had their pensions. I can't remember how long ago this was, maybe 5-10 years ago, where it turned out the pension was not funded and people received considerably less than they thought they were going to receive. This impacted their lives. This had a material impact on their lives. So checking how well funded your pension is, your defined benefit pension plan is very, very important. The other thing that you mentioned, which is a very good point, is the defined benefit pension plan indexed to inflation? Again, the federal pension and provincial and municipal pension plans are almost always indexed to inflation, but they are not all indexed to inflation, which means if you're due, say, $4,000 per month at age 65, you may get $4,000 per month the rest of your life, which in 20 years from now, when you're 85, will not have the same buying power as $4,000 does today.
Right.
Very important.
Critical point there. We're going to shift gears and start to wind this down a little bit, Steve. In terms of time, energy, and attention, what's another area of personal investment for you? What is it that really ignites your interests as an investor and as a human being?
So I spent 15 years overseas, and I did a lot of traveling then, and I returned to Canada to work for the Olympics and stayed in Vancouver, Winter Olympics 2010. And it's been really great, but getting out and traveling and seeing new places around the world that I haven't seen, that's what really ignites me, lights a fire under me. Something I'm very passionate about. Above my desk here, I've got a map of the world with the trips I've done, and there's a lot of blank spaces there, Tim. So a lot of geography to cover in the future as I head towards my own financial independence at some point.
Well, I have to ask you, what's next on your global travel list?
So in the fall, it's the south of France, doing a bit of a bike tour around the south of France, and then I'm going south for a little bit in the winter. You know what the Vancouver winters are like, so going to spend some time down there, and then it's hard to say. There's lots of things on the list, like the Trans-Siberian Railway. I'd love to do that. There's parts of I haven't been to any parts of West Africa, parts of South America. Yeah, there's lots. It's a big world out there.
It is. Tell us about one person, Steve, that we should follow on X, formerly Twitter, Instagram, or LinkedIn, and share why they've been inspiring you lately.
There's a lot. It's kind of a short list of good guys or good people in the personal finance sphere in Canada. I could probably name about 10, I suppose, but two that stand out for me are Bruce Sellery. He's got a Sirius XM show, which is excellent. He's definitely on the people side. And Enoch Omolulu, who has an amazing website called Savvy New Canadians. It is not just for new Canadians. I get his newsletter. It's my favorite newsletter. He's a great guy, and he does a lot of excellent research and has excellent articles and posts about all sorts of aspects of personal finance.
All right. Those names are new to me, so I look forward to looking them up. Recommend one book, Steve, one that you've been reading lately, or maybe one of your all-time faves.
One of my all-time favorites is, I got a few. Probably The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. Have you read that one, Tim?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's brilliant. It's really, really brilliant. He's come out with a second book this year as well. Morgan Housel, The Psychology of Money. It's about investing and financial decisions and the whole sphere of the psychology of money and behavioral finance, which is so important. So I loved it. I'll be rereading it because I do love it.
As a support to my work here, Steve, who is one investor that you would recommend I interview on the Investing Teacher podcast? Maybe one of the two names that you just shared, or perhaps is there someone else who seems like a great speaker and someone who would be a fun conversation?
Both of those guys would be fantastic. There's also a fellow out of Montreal, just near Montreal. Keith Matthews he's part of a company called Toulette Matthews and Associates, and he's been running an investing podcast through his firm for I don't know how many, 5-6 years, and they're really straight talking, no nonsense investment managers and at their company. So he'd be a great guy to talk to.
All right. Thanks so much. And Steve, where can viewers and listeners of the Investing Teacher connect with you and learn more about your work?
Yeah. So I'm on LinkedIn, Steve Bridge, and I'm on X, formerly known as Twitter. I don't know if I'll ever get used to X. Steve Money Coach. And as you mentioned, my website, moneycoachescanada.ca. We're a small firm of advice-only planners. There's only 15 of us, but actually that's the largest firm in Canada of advice-only planners. So, yeah.
And just before we part ways, Steve, say a little bit more too about the services that you offer. I mean, advice only. We talked about that right off the top, but who is this? Who are your services for, and what kind of a person should seek you out?
People, our clients are people who want to be making the optimal financial decisions for their specific situation. One of the challenges today is that there's so many sources of information, Tim. I mean, we've got, you name it, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, the whole internet, right, is full of financial advice. And the challenge for us is that information best for me? It might have worked for that person. They might have bought Bitcoin at $5 and now they're multi-billionaires and, hey, I should buy Bitcoin, I'll become a multi-billionaire. No, it doesn't quite work like that. Or insurance is another one. And that's another tough thing, Tim, for people in Canada, is that pretty much everyone they're talking to with regards to finances is commission-based. And that's just the prevailing model in Canada, but it makes it challenging for people. So I'm thinking of, insurance. When we're being sold insurance, it's commission-based sales. Same with real estate and mortgages and investments. Most people are commission-based. So just got to make sure that you're looking behind the curtain and ensuring that what you're hearing is best for you and your specific situation.
And Steve, if I'm interested in your services, but I don't live in the greater Vancouver area, can you conduct these relationships, these conversations entirely virtually as well?
Yeah, that's the great thing about one great thing that came out of the pandemic is we've moved to online quite a bit. So yeah, I work with people across Canada.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Steve. I really enjoyed this conversation so much. It's been great to learn from you and hear more about your work. Investors, I'm your host, Tim Cavey, and I'm so grateful that you decided to spend some of your day listening to this podcast or watching this video. If you enjoyed the content you heard today from Steve Bridge, make sure to connect with him at all of the places he just mentioned. And again, thank you for tuning in. Thank you, Steve. Take care, everyone, and I'll catch you in the next episode of the Investing Teacher Podcast. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Tim.